In a world saturated with voices, some resonate louder because they are born from the heart, from dedication, from true leadership. Today I invite you to discover the profound, transformative, and luminous story of Cardinal Robert Prevost, a journey that not only reveals the soul of a man but also the living hope of a church that journeys alongside its people. Stay until the end because every word of this story contains a seed of inspiration, courage, and faith. If this type of content touches you, don't wait any longer. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join this community that isn't afraid to look at life with open eyes and an awakened soul. This channel is for you, who seek more than answers. You seek depth, truth, and transformation. He was not born into grandeur. No red carpets awaited him in the alleys of Chicago where his young feet wandered. But what surrounded Robert Prevost was a mosaic of languages, aromas, colors, and contradictions. It wasn't just a city, it was a heartbeat, a chaotic, vibrant whisper of humanity that spoke to him long before he understood what vocation meant. His French, Italian, and Spanish roots braided into a singular, unshakable identity that would one day stretch across continents. Before robes and rings, before pulpits and titles, there was just a boy, curious, contemplative, already listening to something greater than himself. In his home, cultural conversations were not political. They were personal. Family dinners wove together stories from immigrant grandparents, laughter in three tongues, and music that rose like incense from the past. That diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. And from that early exposure, something rare took shape inside him. A soul fluent in differences, unafraid of the unfamiliar. While others might retreat from the unknown, he stepped forward, eager. The sacred would one day wear many faces for him, indigenous, poor, forgotten, and he would recognize them all as kin. As a child, he didn't chase popularity. Instead, he gravitated toward silence, toward books, toward people who spoke from the heart. His teachers noticed his stillness, not as shyness, but as strength. He listened deeply, then asked the kind of questions that made even adults pause. What is justice? Why do some suffer while others feast? These weren't childish curiosities. They were the first stirrings of a conscience that refused to settle for easy answers. And even then, he wasn't just seeking truth, he was seeking how to carry it. When he chose to study mathematics at Villanova, some were surprised. But numbers to him were not cold. They were patterns, mysteries waiting to be unlocked. The same way he saw people, as interconnected pieces of something much bigger. He wasn't just calculating solutions, he was cultivating clarity. And even as he walked the disciplined path of formulas and functions, he volunteered in youth ministries, served at parishes, immersed himself in the messiness of real life. He didn't see academia and service as opposing forces. To him, they were partners in a greater mission. It wasn't ambition that pulled him into ministry. It was ache, a holy ache, a yearning to do something with the weight he carried inside. After graduation, he entered the Catholic Theological Union, and there, his formation became fire. Not just learning scripture, but applying it in hospitals where people took their last breaths. Not just studying theology, but kneeling beside mothers in grief. His mentors saw in him a rare blend, intellect and intimacy, logic and love. And as the months passed, it was clear. This was not about career. It was about calling. He began to see that faith was not about rules. It was about relationship, with God, with the broken, with the overlooked. And as he prepared for ordination, something deepened in him. The belief that the priesthood was not a pedestal, but a path of descent. A path that would require him to disappear, to make space for others, to become a vessel. Every late-night reflection, every spiritual director's challenge, every doubt wrestled into trust. These shaped him more than any diploma. He wasn't being trained to lead crowds. He was being formed to carry crosses. And then came Peru, a land he had never walked, a language he had never spoken, a people he had never met. Yet somehow he already loved them. Joining the Augustinian missionaries wasn't logical. It was spiritual instinct. It was surrender. And as he stepped onto Peruvian soil, he didn't bring answers. He brought presence. He learned the language, not just Spanish, but the unspoken language of dignity, struggle, celebration. He didn't come to convert. He came to a company, and what followed would define him not just as a priest, but as a man. The Peruvian sun didn't soften him. It forged him. In the highlands and barrios, among children with no shoes and elders with centuries in their gaze, he discovered what it meant to belong to a people not by blood, but by love. He taught, yes, but mostly, he listened. He ate their food, joined their festivals, wept at their funerals. It wasn't charity. It was solidarity. He wasn't the American priest. He became Padre Roberto, known, trusted, one of them. And when he chose to become a naturalized citizen, it wasn't a political move. It was a vow of fidelity. His ministry there wasn't glamorous. It was muddy, literal, sometimes exhausting. But it was holy ground. Because transformation doesn't happen in cathedrals alone. It happens in adobe houses where sick children are prayed over. It happens in dusty classrooms where teenagers dare to dream. He celebrated Mass not just in churches, but under trees, on dirt floors, beside candle-lit graves. And each encounter renewed him. The gospel, he discovered, had a heartbeat, and it pulsed strongest among the poor, the forgotten, the invisible who carried heaven in their eyes. Over time, Rome took notice. But for him, Rome was not a promotion. It was a test. Would he trade presents for prestige? Would he forget the names of the villagers who called him brother? He didn't. As prior general of the Augustinian order, he brought the Peruvian spirit with him to the Vatican. He led not by decree, but by dialogue. Not from above, but from within. He visited communities across continents, always refusing to forget that leadership means little if it forgets the faces of the least. The world grew to trust him because he never stopped walking with his people. In Rome, he wasn't just coordinating structures, he was embodying values. He encouraged young vocations, championed intercultural understanding, and prioritized listening sessions where silence mattered more than speeches. Under his guidance, the order didn't just grow in numbers, it grew in soul. He spoke of community not as a nostalgic ideal, but as a radical necessity in a fragmented world. And even as bishops and dignitaries surrounded him, his gaze remained steady, looking always for the one who felt unseen. That's the mark of a shepherd, one who sees beyond the spotlight. He didn't settle for theology that stays on paper. He wanted theology that walks, that weeps, that lifts. And the more he led globally, the more he returned to local truths. He reminded everyone that the church is not first an institution, it is a home, a shelter for the brokenhearted, a table where everyone has a seat. In times of scandal, he didn't disappear. He stepped into the mess, bearing light, demanding justice, refusing to let fear mute the gospel. And that courage made him not just respected, it made him dangerous to systems afraid of truth. It was no surprise when Pope Francis entrusted him with one of the most delicate missions, guiding the appointment of bishops across the world. But Cardinal Prevost didn't just fill posts. He discerned destinies. He engaged with communities, asked the right questions, listened to the whispers of the Spirit. He knew that each bishop chosen would shape the lives of millions. So he chose with reverence, not for loyalty to power, but for fidelity to Christ, for hearts ready to serve, not rule, for men whose authority would be measured by how they washed feet. Even in this global role, he remained grounded. He visited villages, sat in silence with grieving mothers, laughed with children in forgotten towns. He reminded the church that holiness is not a headline. It's hidden in the small, the simple, the steady. He lives what he preaches, that love is not loud, but unwavering. That leadership is not command, but communion. And in a world aching for authenticity, he stands, not perfect, but present, not infallible, but faithful. And that makes all the difference. He never confused intellect with importance. Even with a doctorate in canon law, Cardinal Prevost didn't wield knowledge like a sword. He used it as a compass, something to guide, to orient, to protect. He saw church law not as rigid control, but as sacred responsibility. A framework meant to defend the dignity of the weak, not silence them. In his teachings and writings, he always returned to one truth: canon law must serve the gospel, never overshadow it. It must lift the broken, not bury them beneath doctrine. And that conviction made his voice rare and radiant. He didn't shrink from hard cases. He leaned in. Complex pastoral dilemmas, historical wounds, tensions between cultures. These weren't obstacles to him. They were invitations. Invitations to listen more deeply, to pray more fiercely, to discern with both heart and mind. When bishops sought clarity, he offered more than rulings. He offered presence. When communities faced conflict, he didn't impose solutions. He created space for healing. And that kind of leadership doesn't come from titles. It comes from character, from years of walking beside suffering and never turning away. Underneath the robes, he still lives like a missionary. Simple meals, handwritten notes, walking instead of riding, sitting long after Mass to speak with the last person in line. He never became too important to care, never too busy to bless. And that's why those who meet him remember how they felt in his presence. Seen, heard, dignified, because he lives with intentional humility, the kind that isn't announced, but absorbed. You don't hear it, you feel it. It softens resistance. It builds bridges. It makes people believe again. In synods and Vatican councils he speaks, but only after listening. He invites the voices the Church often misses, the young, the poor, the women, the doubters, not as decoration, but as wisdom bearers. He knows that renewal can't come from the top down. It must rise from below, from the peripheries, from the cries of the unheard. He repeats often, we don't need louder voices, we need deeper listening. And in a church often tempted to preserve over progress, his vision is bold, rooted, and profoundly human. He believes reform is not rebellion. It's fidelity to the heart of Christ, to the mission of the early church, to the Spirit still speaking today. And that's why his leadership unsettles some. Because he doesn't play by the old rules. He plays by eternal ones. Justice, mercy, truth. He's not afraid to name sin, to confront corruption, to weep where wounds have festered too long. But he does it without rage, without spectacle. He does it with love so fierce it refuses to pretend anymore. That kind of love is disruptive, and it's what the Church desperately needs. His presence with youth is transformative. He doesn't just tolerate their questions, he welcomes them. In schools and universities, he leans in when others recoil. He doesn't speak at them, he speaks with them. He laughs, he remembers names. He sits cross-legged on gym floors during retreats. He tells them, you don't have to be perfect, just faithful. He urges them to create, to question, to imagine holiness beyond stereotypes. And they respond, not because he's trendy, but because he's real, and real is irresistible. He often says the Church doesn't need more clerics. It needs more saints, more artists, more poets, more bridge builders. And when he says it, it's not cliché, it's conviction, because he believes in the laity, in ordinary Catholics living extraordinary faith. He lifts up women leaders, affirms their callings, and clears space where barriers once stood. He listens to religious sisters with reverence, not condescension, and that openness is contagious. It's not about slogans, it's about structural shifts, and he's one of the few with the courage to make them. For Cardinal Prevost, poverty is not a theme. It's a wound he carries, a reality he refuses to ignore. In Peru, he helped build systems of education, healthcare, and food, not as favors, but as justice. And globally, he reminds church leaders that the gospel demands a preferential option for the poor, not in theory, in budgets, in pulpits, in priorities. He challenges dioceses to cut excess, to simplify, to walk the talk, because to preach mercy while living in opulence is to fracture credibility, and he won't have it. His voice in the ecological movement is equally prophetic. Inspired by Pope Francis's Laudato Si', he sees creation not as scenery, but as sacred. He supports reforestation projects, ecological education, sustainable farming, all not as political trends, but as spiritual mandates. He teaches that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are one and the same. He urges communities to measure their ecological footprint as seriously as they measure their sacramental life, because caring for creation is not a side issue, it's part of the gospel. Even in the digital world, he is not silent. He doesn't seek fame, but he engages media with integrity. He meets with Catholic communicators, urging them to elevate beauty, truth, and human stories. He discourages clickbait theology, and instead promotes content that heals, informs, and unites. His interviews are marked by calm, by clarity, by depth. He invites the church to not only be present online, but credible, coherent. And he reminds leaders, if our words don't match our lives, we should stop speaking until they do. In a world that often rewards noise, Cardinal Robert Prevost lives as proof that stillness changes everything. He reminds us that holiness isn't loud, it's faithful. That leadership isn't domination, it's presence. That true authority isn't about being followed, but about following Christ with such integrity that others are drawn to do the same. His life isn't a monument to ambition, it's a testimony to surrender. And in that surrender, something sacred shines. A church that breathes again, that listens again, that dares to walk with the broken instead of ahead of them. If his story moved you, if something stirred in you while listening, don't let it fade. Let it lead you deeper, into courage, into compassion, into a faith that does not sit safely behind walls, but stretches arms wide open into the world. Subscribe to this channel, not just to stay informed, but to stay ignited, to journey with us as we follow the kind of leadership that mirrors Christ, humble, brave, and always rooted in love. Let the call be clear. Subscribe now and follow Jesus, not the idea of him, not the institution about him, but the living Christ, who speaks through lives like Prevost's and wants to speak through yours too. Don't just watch. Become part of this. Let your faith have a voice. Let your presence matter. Let your light break through someone's darkness, the way this story may have broken into yours. And if you've ever doubted that quiet faith could still transform the world, remember this journey. From the streets of Chicago to the altars of Rome, it was not noise that led Prevost. It was fidelity. Unshaken, unseen, unrelenting. That's the kind of faith we're building here together. A community that doesn't perform religion but lives it. Messy, real, and full of grace. I'm Oliver. I create this space because I believe stories like this one can wake us up, can shake us from indifference, and lead us back to the fire we were born to carry. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to walk beside you, to ask better questions, and to rediscover a church that feels like home again. Thank you for staying, for feeling, for searching with me. I hope you don't leave this video the same way you came. Let's keep growing together. Let's keep choosing depth in a shallow world. And above all, let's keep following the one who still walks with us, quietly, faithfully through it all. Until next time, with all my heart, stay close, stay awake, and stay brave.